Okay, well, last year when we bought our Coleman 17B, right after we got it and we got it ready, we bought a new mattress and we were ready to take off and go on a trip. The Texas weather decided it was going to be 105, 108, things like that every day for 2 months. We tried going on some trips with it like that, but that's just miserable. I mean, you want to get up and have breakfast and then maybe go for a hike in a state park or national park or somewhere like that, and it's already 95 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning or something, and then you can't go for an afternoon hike or anything like that, or after lunch or anything. You just got to hide in the RV. We did that a couple of times, and then we tried a trip on a really nice warm spell in November, and that was actually a pretty good trip. We went down to the Texas coast during the first week of November, and we did a thing about Quintana, Texas, or Fort Quintana, a video about it, and it was pretty nice. We liked it. But right now, here we are, and we're headed out on our first real camping trip. Those other ones were, test trips, I guess you could say, that we're trying to get used to the idea and learn how to work our RV. But today, we're headed out, and this is going to be a real trip. In fact, it's probably going to take maybe 4 episodes to cover this trip, because we're going to be stopping at a lot of really cool, interesting places. And our first stop is going to be Palo Duro Canyon in the Texas Panhandle, and it is a spectacular place. If you don't believe me, just go to Palo Duro Canyon State Park and look at their first picture right there on the page. It's beautiful. We've been there once before, I don't know, what, 10 or 15 years ago, I guess, and we really didn't explore it. We kind of drove to it and looked down in it and drove around just a little bit and never even got out of our car, and promised ourselves we were going to go back. And today is that day. We're going to be arriving this afternoon in Palo Duro Canyon, and we're going to be camping right down on the floor of the canyon. The canyon is 800 to 1,000 feet deep, and just beautiful. And so we're going to be down there on the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River, which then ties into the Red River and makes the border between Oklahoma and Texas. But a neat place that I really wanted to go, and that's going to just be the first stop on this journey out west and the things we're going to see. So I hope you come along with us and kind of enjoy the ride and the trip in our Coleman 17B. Okay, right now we've just passed what's called Campground Canyon State Park, and that's kind of the tail end of the Palo Duro Canyon, to be quite honest. But we've got another 100 miles to go before we get to where we're going. Palo Duro Canyon is over 100 miles long, and but what we're entering right now is what's called the Staked Plains, or the Llano Estacado. And people like to think it means because it had these sticky kind of mesquite bushes and things like that, and I like this definition better. It's not staked, it is stockaded. And as you go along, you see these places where things are there's like plateaus carved out of the landscape, and they look like forts or fortresses or castles, however you want to put it. And you just look like, oh look, there's another one of those stockades up there, and that's what the explorers thought it was. And so they named it that, even though they knew better. We're coming up on one right now, as a matter of fact, and but it looks like a stockade. It looks like we're coming up on some kind of fortress or something. It's hard to tell right now, but we'll get a little bit closer. Anyway, do you see it? You see what I'm talking about? That plateau there that looks kind of like a fortress or a stockade. Well, anyway, that's one example of it. What is happening here is the Cap Rock Escarpment, and that's the name of this area where we transition from the relative lowlands of West Texas to the high plateau of the Great Plains, that where Amarillo sits. Amarillo sits at something like 3,500 feet above sea level. People don't realize how high it is. You're supposed to use that high altitude cake directions that's on your cake mix box to cook in Amarillo. But anyway, we're doing we're climbing up onto the cap rock where the high plains there. That is where Palo Duro Canyon starts. So we'll be getting there in just a minute. Okay, we just made one for the blooper reel. Let's try again. We're on a spur of the CC trail here at Palo Duro Canyon, and it's the Goodnight Mountain Overlook trail. And the Goodnight Mountain Overlook is that ridge right along there, and it's kind of cool, and that's why we're getting a picture of it and why we walk this way. So there you go. There it is. As I said, the Comanches and the other native tribes of this area foraged here and hunted here for generations and generations, hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. There is some evidence of people living in prehistoric, seriously prehistoric people living and foraging here, even long before the what we call the Indians and those tribes and things like that. To my left is a rock, and it's not a normal rock. Right here on the ground. This is a mortar and pestle rock. This is a Native American kitchen. What would happen is the Native women would, gather things that they could eat. There were mesquite, beans actually were cookable. There was a whole bunch of stuff that we wouldn't think about eating today that they would eat. And very often what they would do is they would grind this stuff and make a mush or a meal or something like that out of it, out of a lot of things. And so a lot of wild things that existed in this area. What they would do is they'd take a post, say a branch of a fairly straight tree, like this one, let's say, and they would make a long post, and what they would do is they would put their berries or beans, their roots or whatever in these depressions, and they would start banging on them, okay, until they made some type of mush. And after they would do this for several generations, and that piece of lumber basically would make such a hole in this rock, they'd go to another depression and they would start another, okay? And here's where they had one here, but it doesn't go down as far. But they would start on that and they would mash other things up. These holes, some of them, this one here, has gone all the way through the rock. How many generations of a woman standing here with a rock or with a post banging into that rock did it take for that soft wood to hollow out a hole in this rock? How many generations did that take? And not only that, but they did it to several places, and they already started some new ones. Here's a real old one right here. These were these are mortar and pestle type operations. And so this big rock here was the mortar or the pestle, whatever, and it would and they would do this, make this. To this day, if you look closely, you can see discoloration from berries, or maybe they made pemmican, stuff like that, with squirrel meat or whatever too. You can see that the side of this rock here is still stained from 1,000 years ago. Yes, people have lived here, foraged here for hundreds of thousands of years, and they've left their mark. Here's one example. Okay, behind me are two great big geologic features. What would you call those? Would you call those mountains? Yeah, kinda, but they're actually kind of places where the river went around the sides of it and burrowed down into the ground from the level that where everything is up above it. If you go up, if you were to climb up these cliffs, you'd see like flat land going on either direction. It's not like we're surrounded by mountains, or are we? I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. By the way, while I'm talking about these cliffs and these walls of Palo Duro Canyon, their height ranges from 800 feet to 1,000 in some places. That's how tall they are. Now, think about this. 1,000-foot building is a skyscraper with over 100 floors. When's the last time you were in a skyscraper, a building that had 100 floors and went up to the top of it? It's a long way. It doesn't look like it, but you can tell that these things are really, that's 1,000 feet relief, elevation right there. Well, here we are kind of at the southern end of Palo Duro Canyon State Park. Now, that doesn't mean I'm at the southern end of Palo Duro Canyon. Palo Duro Canyon is 100 miles long and 20 miles wide in places. It goes way south of here, many, many miles south of here is another state park called Campground Canyon State Park, which is really still part of this same formation and part of the canyon, really. But and it's a big place for bike riders and things like that. Right now we're near a location where one of the most significant battles of the Indian Wars took place. What was going on? Well, the 4th Cavalry was harassing Indians all over in an effort to get them to move back to the reservation in Oklahoma. All right, and they found the Indians' secret location, which was here in Palo Duro Canyon, where groups of Comanches, Kiowas, Apaches, and maybe even some others had camped up here and pooled all their resources, including well over 1,000 horses and food and all kinds of stuff to be able to winter here. It was going to be their secret hideout, and they wouldn't have to be back on the reservation, and they could be renegades or whatever they needed to be. And they were hiding out here. Well, Ronald McKenzie, I think it was Colonel Ronald McKenzie, found this secret hideout, and one morning snuck up on them and attacked them, I guess you could say. They like to say harassed them. They attacked them and caused the natives to flee and scatter. And what they did was they took all their provisions, took 1,400 horses, 1,000 of which they just had to kill right there because they didn't want the Comanches to have a chance to reclaim them. So over 1,000 of them they killed, and And because they took their food, they took what they were planning on to use for the winter here, it forced those natives to go back to Oklahoma to the reservation. And that was the whole point. Only 4 Indians were killed during the battle. None of the American troops were killed. Only 4 natives were killed during the battle. Some will argue, though, that a lot of the natives chose to not go back to the reservation and tried to make it out the winter on their own and probably died of starvation. Who knows? But so that did cause problems and maybe indirectly caused some deaths, and nobody wants that. But the point was to drive them back to the reservation. This was in 1874. Now, this was the height of the Indian Wars, both here in Texas and up north. In 76, remember, that's when Custer met his fate fighting the Sioux up there. So this was right at that time when it was pretty much all about to come to a head or to a close, if you want to say. And this was probably that decisive moment, battle, or whatever you want to call it, where it pretty much ended the Indian Wars and the Texas frontier. And that was in 1874. And it happened right near this spot, right here in Palo Duro Canyon. There's so much history here. When the Charlie Goodnight ranch that he had here, where he set out to try to protect American bison, for one thing. And then later he had big herds of cattle here and he would let the Comanches come here and stay here, and every so often in return for kind of protecting the herd, they could take a cattle every once in a while and use it for their food. And he ended up establishing a really good relationship with the natives in this area, including famously Quanah Parker. And so he's kind of a hero in this area because of what he did. There's history everywhere here in Palo Duro Canyon. And right here was probably the most decisive battle in the Indian Wars and pretty much ended it here in Texas. So there you go. These are Aoudad sheep back in all around the 50s or something like that. USGIs who had served in North Africa, in the Atlas Mountains there on the Barbary Coast, they saw these animals and thought, you know what, I bet those would do really well in Texas, like in the Panhandle and stuff like that, and we could hunt them. Well, they actually introduced 2 sets, one on the north end of the canyon, one on the south end of the canyon, and they did really well. And in fact, they are all over the place, not just in the canyon, but up on the ranches, up above the canyon and everywhere else. And a lot of places, in fact, they estimate there are more of these Barbary sheep in Texas than there are in North Africa. Palo Duro Canyon is deep. It's 1,000 feet deep, and that's a lot of different strata that it goes through. And in this case, it goes through 200 million years of time. And so we find Triassic life fossils. And to give you an idea, when they talk about Jurassic Park, it's Triassic in age, and then younger is Jurassic, and then after that is the Cretaceous. Okay, and Jurassic had a lot of life. That's why they chose that. But really, what we see in Texas more often is Cretaceous type of fossils. All right, and Cretaceous goes back like 65 million years, and Triassic goes back over 200 million years. And so we see both. You know, we see the Triassic stuff, which is the more primitive, smaller dinosaurs and things of that nature. And then we also see not just Triassic fossils, but then we also see some Pliocene fossils. And Pliocene is almost relatively modern type fossils, and we see things like elephants and or mastodons and different types of primitive horses and things of that nature. And so it goes from 2 million years ago to 200 million years ago in terms of fossils in Palo Duro Canyon. A lot of the initial work for Palo Duro Canyon and a lot of state parks in Texas was done by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. The Civilian Conservation Corps was created in 1933 to give a job to young men 18 to 25 years old, but then they decided to add jobs for veterans as well to that, so you could be over 25 years old and still get a job with the CCC. Like, this was right in the middle of the Depression in '33, and they were literally paid $1 a day. And their saying was, hey, at $1 a day, in just a million days, I'll be a millionaire. And so that's really what they were paid, and but they did a lot with regard to the state parks in the state of Texas. And Palo Duro Canyon was a big project.